Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we drill down into complex ideas using a stack of curated sources to extract the essential insights you need to be genuinely well-informed.
Hey there.
Today, we are exploring one of the most foundational and, I think, truly transformative ideas in modern education.
We are. The topic is constructivism.
Constructivism. And this is a deep dive into a philosophy that really, it just fundamentally restructured the whole relationship between the student, the teacher, and, well, knowledge itself.
It did. And for this, we've synthesized excerpts from a really excellent educational philosophy series. It explains how learning shifted from being, this passive reception of facts.
Just pouring information in.
Exactly, to an active internal process of creation.
Okay, let's unpack that core idea right there, because the concept, it sounds simple, but its consequences are just revolutionary. The traditional model, it views the student as, what, an empty vessel?
An empty vessel, yeah, or a blank slate, an unwritten book waiting for the teacher to just imprint information onto it.
Constructivism just rejects that completely. Its core tenet is that students don't merely receive knowledge.
No.
They are actively involved in creating it. They are builders.
And that framing, the student as a cognitive architect, that's really key to our mission today. We need to understand the mechanics of this philosophy.
Right.
How the learning environment has to be structured to even facilitate this building, who the key intellectual architects were, and I think most importantly, why this active process results in understanding that is so much deeper.
And more lasting, right.
And more lasting for the learner.
Yeah. So when you look at the source material, the origin story of constructivism really rests on the shoulders of two, absolute giants of developmental psychology.
Jean Piaget and Lev Vygotsky.
Piaget and Vygotsky. And they provided the research that just irrevocably demonstrated that learning is not some standardized passive event that just happens to a student.
That's right. And it's important to note right away that while they're both kind of lumped under this big banner of constructivism, they have some fundamental subtle differences.
Okay.
Piaget is often associated with what we'd call individual constructivism. He was intensely focused on the individual learner. He charted how they construct these mental frameworks or schemas through direct interaction with their environment.
So like with physical objects.
Exactly, with their physical environment, and then reflecting on those experiences. It's a very internal cognitive transformation.
So Piaget is the one watching the kid build a mental model of gravity by
dropping things on the floor over and over again.
Yeah.
Precisely. His work shows that knowledge is built sequentially. It has to be assimilated into structures you already have, or accommodated by changing those structures when new information, conflicts with the old.
Okay, so that's Piaget. And then you have Vygotsky, who shifts the perspective entirely, pushing more toward, what, social constructivism.
Social constructivism. Vygotsky argued, and he argued vehemently, that knowledge isn't just internally constructed. He believed it's fundamentally and first constructed socially.
So between people.
Between people. He believed meaningful understanding is co-constructed through interaction, through conversation, and collaboration with peers and more knowledgeable people, all within a cultural context.
So if Piaget was about the mind interacting with things,
Vygotsky was about the mind interacting with people and the cultural tools they provide, like language. Language was huge for him.
that is a critical distinction. And together, their work really sets the stage for how we understand learning. It's built through individual experience, and it's refined through social interaction. And both of those paths require the learner to connect new ideas to what they already know.
Yes.
And that right there brings us to the first essential building block of this philosophy, prior knowledge.
The foundation.
Exactly. So if learning is a building process, then every constructivist effort has to start by inspecting that foundation. Constructivism insists learning begins not when the teacher starts the lesson,
No.
but with this complex, unique tapestry of knowledge and beliefs the learner walks in the door with. This is like the first non-negotiable step.
And what's fascinating is how much depth the source material gives to this starting point. We aren't just talking about, facts from last week's quiz.
Right.
Prior knowledge is the student's entire existing mental landscape. That includes their personal experiences, their deeply held cultural beliefs, their passions, their interests, and even, critically, their misconceptions.
Okay, give me an example. So if a student grew up on a farm, their prior knowledge about, say, photosynthesis
is going to be fundamentally different from a student who grew up in downtown Manhattan.
even if neither has ever formally studied biology.
Absolutely. Those unique backgrounds, they form these sophisticated mental frameworks, or what Piaget would call schemas.
Yeah.
Think of these frameworks like established networks in the brain. They're like pre-built neighborhoods. Any new information that comes along, it doesn't just land on a blank lot.
Yeah.
It has to be integrated into or adapted by one of these existing neighborhoods. So these frameworks, they're actively filtering and shaping how new concepts get processed.
I think we need a concrete scenario here to show just how powerful those filters can be, especially when, prior beliefs clash with new data.
Okay, let's use a classic example. Imagine a teacher introducing the concept of air pressure and atmospheric vacuum in a middle school science class.
Right.
If a student has a strong, maybe culturally inherited belief that nature abhors a vacuum, they might struggle deeply to accept that low pressure pulls things,
Even if they see it happen.
even if the physics demonstration in front of them proves it. Their existing framework, that ingrained belief, is actively fighting the new scientific concept.
That's profound. So if the teacher just barrels ahead lecturing about barometric formulas and H. Pascals,
They're ignoring the foundational beliefs that's causing all the cognitive friction.
you're building on sand.
Exactly.
Right.
And this is the strong warning the source material provides. Ignoring prior knowledge makes learning shallow. It makes it temporary. And often it leads to the complete dismissal of the new material.
The student just goes back to their old idea.
They do. If you don't address that conflict, the student retains the misconception, not the instruction.
I can relate to that so perfectly. It reminds me of, college exams where I would just desperately cram dates or chemical formulas into my short-term memory, just long enough to pass the test. And the minute I walked out of that exam hall, poof, the information just evaporated because I had never built a proper anchor for it. I never connected it to anything I genuinely cared about.
It vanished because your brain didn't integrate it. True learning is integration.
Right.
But when a teacher acknowledges and surfaces, and then utilizes that existing framework, even if they're surfacing misconceptions just to explicitly address them, that's when it unlocks dramatically deeper comprehension.
Makes it personal.
Makes the learning personal, relevant, and far stickier. Because the student becomes invested in fixing their own incomplete or incorrect mental model.
So practically speaking then, what does a constructivist teacher do at the beginning of a unit that, say, a traditional lecturer might just skip entirely? It sounds like they have to be a detective first.
They absolutely need to be detectives. They have to employ deliberate design to activate this knowledge and diagnose those misconceptions.
How?
Well, the source highlights specific techniques. Before instruction even begins, teachers might use things like KWL charts.
No, want to know, learn.
Exactly. Or concept mapping exercises, or even just simple open-ended questions designed to elicit what's already in their heads. They might say something like, before we talk about global trade, tell me what you think a supply chain actually looks like for the phone in your hand.
That is a fundamentally different question than read chapter 1 and tell me the definition of a supply chain.
It is. It's an invitation. It's an invitation for the student to lay out their internal landscape for you.
And then what?
Then teachers encourage students to make explicit, deliberate connections. How does the water cycle we learned about last month relate to this new unit on climate change? It's a conscious effort to surface the student's existing narrative,
So that the new stuff has something to stick to.
so that the new content can be built upon a stable base, rather than just floating precariously in isolation.
I mean, this really honors the student as an individual, someone with unique experiences and knowledge. It's not treating them like interchangeable units in a factory line.
Precisely. And this foundation, it sets the stage for the entire rest of the learning process. Once the teacher knows where the student stands, then they can provide the structural support needed to guide them forward.
Okay, which moves us directly to our next section. The support structure the constructivist environment provides.
The mechanics of support.
So we've established the foundation, that's the prior knowledge. Now we introduce the key mechanisms that help the student move from where they are to where they need to be. And the first of these mechanisms is a huge one, scaffolding. This term is absolutely foundational to constructivism.
Scaffolding is a term borrowed directly from construction.
Yeah.
And the definition is just. It's elegant. It is the provision of just enough temporary support to help students bridge the gap between what they can already do independently.
And what they're capable of doing next.
Exactly.
It's basically targeted assistance. So the support isn't the lesson itself. It's more like the ramp that gets them into the lesson.
That's a good analogy. And the forms this support can take are highly dynamic. It's not just, a single sheet of notes.
Right.
The source material gives a bunch of examples. It might be a subtle hint. It could be a highly structured activity that simplifies a really multi-step task. It could be a guiding question that forces them to reconsider a variable, or maybe providing a detailed model or a completed example before asking them to try the task on their own.
I think this connects directly back to the need for deeper learning that we were talking about. Why is this target support so crucial from a cognitive perspective? What's happening in the brain?
This is where we touch on something called cognitive load theory. When a student is faced with a novel or a complex problem, their working memory, that's the mental space where we actively process information, it can get overloaded really, really quickly.
Right. There's only so much you can hold in your head at once.
Exactly. And if the task requires too many new simultaneous steps, the student ends up spending all their cognitive energy just managing the complexity itself, rather than actually learning and integrating the new concept.
So the whole point of scaffolding is to manage that cognitive load for them.
Precisely. By simplifying the structural demands of the task, say, by providing a template or breaking a 9-step process into 3 manageable chunks, the scaffolding offloads all those extraneous demands on working memory.
Which frees them up.
It frees up the student's brain to focus its energy entirely on the core concept being taught. And that leads to genuine integration, not just stress management.
But what distinguishes effective scaffolding from, well, just giving the student the answer? Where's the line?
That's the critical requirement. The support must gradually fade. It has to be removed as the student gains competence, confidence, and starts to internalize the skill. If the support remains indefinitely, it just creates dependency, it becomes a crutch. But if it disappears too quickly, frustration sets in and they give up. The goal is always independence, which means the supports have to eventually disappear entirely.
This reminds me of that classic analogy from the source material, the ladder analogy.
Yes, it's a perfect illustration. The teacher provides the steps. That's the scaffolding, the temporary support structure.
But the student has to climb the ladder.
The student has to do the climbing. The effort, the cognitive work, must be borne by the student.
That captures the balance perfectly. The student feels capable because the climb is broken down into achievable steps, but they're still challenged because the teacher didn't just, lift them to the top.
Exactly. It keeps their thinking stretched without inducing that crippling feeling of, I can't do this. It is a deliberate, highly targeted intervention that moves the learner forward, always aiming for that moment when they no longer need the support to achieve mastery.
Okay, so scaffolding is the tool the teacher uses. But who else can provide that necessary support? And that question leads us directly into Vygotsky's profound insight: the peer group. He argued that learning is fundamentally a social cultural process, and that makes social interaction an absolute cornerstone of constructivism.
Vygotsky saw the classroom as this vibrant ecosystem where meaning isn't just delivered from on high.
Right.
It's actively co-constructed. His focus was on the social environment as the engine of cognitive growth. Students don't just sit next to each other and individually build their knowledge. They learn through and with each other in this deeply symbiotic way.
And the mechanism for all this co-construction is primarily language, isn't it?
Absolutely. Vygotsky considered language to be the most crucial cultural tool we possess, period. Through conversation, students have to articulate their thoughts, they have to negotiate meaning, they have to clarify what they're thinking.
I find that's so true. I only realize what I don't understand when I try to explain it to a friend.
Yes.
The gaps in my own logic become immediately painfully obvious.
Exactly. The act of articulation solidifies the understanding for yourself. The source details how this dynamic plays out. Students learn through structured conversation and collaboration, through shared experiences like a group science experiment, by explaining ideas to peers, which forces a deep review, and by challenging each other's thinking in things like debates or project critiques.
And when you have to defend your reasoning and then listen to a counterargument and then maybe reformulate your position, that's an inherently rigorous and dynamic learning process.
It is.
The understanding you get in that kind of environment is just impossible to achieve in isolation.
That interaction creates what we call dynamic understanding. Students are constantly testing, refining, and adapting their knowledge in real time. The community provides this constant, multifaceted feedback loop that a single teacher, no matter how good they are, can't possibly match.
Which is why a constructivist classroom looks and sounds really different.
Very different.
Yeah, if someone walked into a truly constructivist environment, they're not going to see 30 students sitting in rows, quietly taking notes. So what are the concrete, visible practices of this social learning in action?
They're characterized by movement and noise, what Vygotsky might have called productive noise. You see extensive use of group projects, collaborative problem-solving exercises, peer editing and revision workshops, and methods like reciprocal teaching.
Where students take turns leading the discussion.
Exactly, or summarizing the material for each other. In these setups, the teacher is intentionally distributing the responsibility for creating knowledge across the entire group.
Shifting the focus away from themselves as the sole source of wisdom.
And that distribution of expertise is key. This intense focus on social interaction, especially when you pair it with expert guidance, leads us directly to Vygotsky's central, most powerful concept, the ideal space where this collaborative learning is most effective.
The zone of proximal development.
The ZPD.
The zone of proximal development, or ZPD, I mean, this isn't just Vygotsky's most important contribution. You could argue it's the centerpiece of modern constructivist instruction. If you need a single takeaway defining where the magic happens,
It's here.
it's here.
The ZPD is a truly elegant concept, but it needs a really precise definition. It is the theoretical space that exists between two distinct abilities.
Okay.
First, what a student can accomplish entirely independently on their own right now, and second, what they can achieve only with guidance from a teacher or through collaboration with a more capable peer.
So we have the mastered skills on one end, things that are already easy, that require no real mental effort.
Right.
And on the other end, we have the frustration zone material that's just too complex, even with a lot of help. The ZPD is that narrow, fertile region right between those two boundaries.
That is the crucial sweet spot analysis. This area is the optimal, almost sacred place for instruction because it meets two indispensable psychological criteria at the same time.
Okay, what are they?
First, it's challenging enough to actively promote genuine cognitive growth. If we only teach things the student already knows, we just get boredom and stagnation.
Right. And second?
Second, and this is just as important, it is supported enough through that effective scaffolding or peer collaboration to prevent the counterproductive motivation-killing frustration.
So it's tough, but not impossible.
Exactly. Learning within the ZPD ensures the effort feels high stakes yet achievable, and that makes the whole process inherently meaningful.
This sounds ideal, of course, but let's bring in the challenge that some critiques raised. What happens when instruction happens outside the ZPD? Let's say it's too easy.
Okay, so when instruction is below the ZPD, students experience mastery, but without engagement. The concept is assimilated immediately, but because it didn't require any stretch or any effort, the student just gets bored and often disengages completely. The learning is validated, but growth stops.
And on the flip side, when instruction is way above the ZPD, even with heavy scaffolding,
Then the student enters the frustration zone. The cognitive load is simply too high. They experience what's called learned helplessness, a complete shutdown. Or they resort to really superficial coping mechanisms, like just guessing or trying to rote memorize without any comprehension because the task feels insurmountable.
so the sources really emphasize that effective learning has to live right on that boundary line.
It has to.
This intense focus on the individual boundary line on each student's ZPD that demands an incredible level of precision and skill from the teacher. How does a teacher actually manage to operate constantly within the ZPD for a whole class?
It requires intense observation, diagnostic expertise, and perfect timing. They can't just rely on a static, one-size-fits-all lesson plan. The teacher has to observe carefully to assess each student's current independent capacity. They're constantly asking themselves, what steps did they manage without my help? Where exactly did they stumble?
And this diagnostic work has to be done for, 30 unique students, all moving at different speeds. I mean, that sounds like a recipe for teacher burnout. Is it even realistic to expect that level of customization of the ZPD for every student in every single lesson?
That's a fair and a vital challenge, and it highlights the main practical barrier to implementation. The answer is no. A teacher cannot offer perfectly individualized one-on-one attention constantly.
So how does it work?
The constructivist classroom provides ways to manage this complexity, and it's largely through peer dynamics and strategic grouping.
Okay, what does that look like in practice?
Teachers use something called differentiated instruction. They might group students heterogeneously, making sure a peer who is slightly more capable, someone who has already mastered the concept, so it's within their independent ability, is paired with a student who's struggling just outside the zone.
Ah, so the other student becomes the scaffolder.
That peer then provides crucial temporary scaffolding, and often it's more relatable than the teacher's explanation.
That makes sense.
And furthermore, the teacher uses targeted, brief, formative assessments. These are quick checks for understanding, constantly throughout the lesson, not just at the end. These are moments where the teacher can swiftly identify which 5 students need a small group intervention right now, or who needs an advanced task that pushes their current ZPD boundary.
So the ZPD framework shifts the teacher's focus from delivery
To diagnosis and responsive design.
That makes the task feel more manageable. It's about providing the right system of support, not just trying to be everywhere at once. And this is where we see all the concepts fully converge. We should probably explicitly reinforce the relationship between the ZPD and scaffolding.
Absolutely. The ZPD is the conceptual space. It's the optimal target area for growth. Scaffolding is the tool or the method that you use to bridge that specific gap.
So you identify the ZPD boundary.
And you apply the precise amount of scaffolding needed to help the student cross it.
Okay, so the ZPD defines the potential for growth, and scaffolding is the technique you use to realize that growth. It's the difference between identifying the perfect destination and actually navigating the path to get there.
Exactly. Without the ZPD, scaffolding is just random help. But within the ZPD, scaffolding is highly efficient, maximizing learning with minimal cognitive friction.
Okay, now that we understand the philosophy and its key mechanisms, let's zoom out and look at how this changes the physical look and the fundamental purpose of the classroom itself. So if we trace the path from Piaget and Vygotsky all the way to a modern school, we see that constructivism translates directly into a pedagogical strategy, inquiry-based learning.
Right.
And this fundamentally replaces the old model where students just sat quietly and waited for the teacher to give them the answer.
Inquiry-based learning makes that shift from content consumption to process mastery explicit. The foundational shift is from the teacher providing the answer to the student being the one asking the critical question.
The student becomes the primary intellectual agent in the room. So instead of just receiving a finished fact, they're given a problem or a scenario or a question, often something complex and open-ended. And the teacher encourages them to explore that problem, investigate potential solutions using research and critical analysis, and ultimately discover the underlying concepts on their own.
And this is where true ownership of education is born. When a student spends weeks researching water quality in their local river to understand chemistry, they aren't just learning about pH levels. They're becoming researchers. They're becoming critical thinkers and local problem solvers. The process itself transforms them from passive absorbers of information into active manipulators of data.
And the outcome isn't just a deeper understanding of the content, it's the acquisition of skills that they can take anywhere, transferable skills.
Precisely. Inquiry teaches them how to question the world, how to analyze conflicting information, and critically, how to apply their learning to entirely new and novel contexts.
So when they encounter a similar but maybe more complex problem down the road, they have a toolkit, they have a mental procedure they actually built themselves.
And that self-constructed procedure is far more resilient than a step-by-step method they just memorized from a textbook. The ownership fuels an intrinsic, sustained curiosity that, hopefully continues long after they leave the classroom.
Which means this profound shift in student responsibility has to lead to an equally profound shift in the educator's role.
It has to. We have to contrast the traditional teacher, the lecturer, the content expert who transmits information, with the constructivist guide.
In the traditional model, the teacher's success is often measured by their ability to deliver content clearly and comprehensively.
Right. How good was the lecture? But in the constructivist model, their success is measured by the student's independent discovery and synthesis.
The teacher moves from being the sage on the stage
to the guide on the side. Their whole identity shifts to that of a facilitator, a coach, a resource manager, and I think most importantly, a master designer of learning experiences.
So the main focus isn't on delivering the content anymore, but on architecting the environment.
Their primary task is architectural. They have to design learning experiences and environments that inherently motivate students to think deeply, to explore independently, and to interact socially.
And what does that involve?
It involves curating authentic resources, creating complex real-world problems, like case studies or project-based learning scenarios, and strategically timing the introduction, and then the removal of scaffolding.
It sounds like the most difficult part of the job is choosing the right initial question. It has to be complex enough to merit a deep inquiry, but manageable enough to keep the student in that ZPD sweet spot.
It is the ultimate balancing act.
Yeah.
And the resulting classroom reflects this. It stops being a place of delivery where facts are just transmitted,
Right.
and instead it becomes a vibrant place of discovery where knowledge is actively sought and challenged and constructed through collaboration.
Okay, let's address the elephant in the room here. Why is this philosophy, established by thinkers decades ago, why is it perhaps more vital now than ever before, in the age of generative AI and just this overwhelming flow of information?
Well, the necessity of constructivism stems directly from the nature of the modern world. I mean, we are drowning in information. The sources argue that students are no longer challenged by a lack of facts. They're challenged by the inability to distinguish credible facts from noise, the inability to synthesize disparate pieces of data, and to apply learned concepts to rapidly changing technological realities.
It's like, why memorize the capital of a country when an AI can tell you in half a second? The
Exactly.
real skill is in asking why that capital city was founded there and how its geography affects its political power structure.
Exactly. Rote memorization is increasingly obsolete. Constructivism prepares students for a world where adaptation is the only constant. It nurtures those crucial 21st century skills: robust critical thinking, necessary independence, genuine creativity, and effective collaboration.
These aren't soft skills anymore.
No, they're survival skills in the modern economy. And furthermore, constructivism's emphasis on building deep mental models, these schemas that can adapt and stretch, that's vital. When an industry changes overnight because of a new technology, the student who has deeply constructed the underlying principles of, say, logistics, they can adapt quickly.
But the student who only memorized the steps of the old process.
Is immediately lost.
And it also respects the individual identity of the student, which feels paramount in a diverse society.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
By focusing on how a student connects new knowledge to their personal, cultural, and existing world, constructivism respects individual learning paths. It's the absolute antithesis of the standardized factory model of education.
Right.
It says, your background is your asset. Let's build from it. It ensures knowledge isn't just received impersonally, but is owned personally.
So it sounds like the philosophy is really designed to create lifelong learners, people who are equipped not just with answers, but with the necessary intellectual resilience to tackle problems that haven't even been invented yet.
That is the highest aspiration of the constructivist model.
So as we synthesize everything we've covered, from that essential starting point of prior knowledge, through the precise deployment of scaffolding inside the zone of proximal development and into the modern constructivist classroom, the final outcome seems pretty clear.
It is. When students actively engage in building their own learning structures, when they grapple with concepts through inquiry and social interaction, the resulting knowledge is meaningful, it's personal, and it's profoundly lasting. It just shifts the entire measure of what educational success even is.
And this fundamental shift really defines the true aspirational purpose of education. It's not just about accumulating information, it's about transformation.
Precisely. The outcome is not passive recipients of content. They don't just learn facts. They understand them deeply enough to manipulate them.
Right.
They don't just answer questions posed to them on a test. They acquire the fundamental capacity to ask the deep, challenging questions that drive all future discovery. That intrinsic curiosity and self-direction, those are the final products of constructivism.
A perfectly active conclusion to a deep dive on active learning.
And this journey, which focused so heavily on the cognitive process, how we build these knowledge structures, it leads naturally to the next layer of educational philosophy, the emotional and personal journey of the learner. As you mull over this idea of individualized knowledge ownership, we encourage you to look ahead. Our next deep dive is going to explore humanism. That's the educational philosophy focusing on the whole child, their emotions, their uniqueness, and the vital journey towards self-actualization and becoming their best self.
That sounds like an essential counterpart to what we've talked about today.
It really is. It provides the other side of the coin.
We'll see you next time for the next deep dive.